Australia's median house price recently crossed the $1 million mark in Sydney. Melbourne is not far behind. Brisbane, which used to be the affordable alternative, has overtaken most European capitals. Perth is accelerating fast enough that people who left for cheaper ground a decade ago can no longer afford to come back. And yet, scattered across this continent, there are towns where you can buy a house outright for less than the annual rent on a one-bedroom flat in Surrey Hills. Not shacks, not flood zones, not ghost towns with 3 residents and a petrol station that closed in 2009. Real houses on real streets in real communities where the bakery knows your name by the second week. 11 of them, to be exact. 11 towns where the median house price sits well below the national average. Some of them significantly so. Towns that are quiet, honest, and so thoroughly overlooked that the numbers will make anyone holding a Sydney mortgage feel something between envy and genuine disbelief. This is the full breakdown, town by town. What each place actually offers, what it genuinely costs, and the one thing the real estate listings never find room for. Number 1. Maryborough, Queensland. 2 hours north of Brisbane along the Bruce Highway, Maryborough sits in the Fraser Coast region with a heritage streetscape that looks like the set of a period production. Wide timber verandas, cast iron lacework, and old fig trees lining the main boulevard. This town was built in the colonial era as a port on the Moree River, and it has never let go of its own history. The city centre contains over 300 buildings, heritage listed at the state level. The median house price in Maryborough currently sits around $190,000. For context, that is less than the deposit on an entry-level unit in inner Brisbane. What you actually get for that money is a detached house on a proper block of land, usually with a backyard, a covered outdoor area, and enough room for a vegetable garden. The town has a hospital, a TAFE campus, 2 major supermarkets, hardware stores, and the full practical infrastructure a permanent resident needs. The Moree Valley Rattler, a heritage steam train running tourist excursions through the surrounding valley, means there is always something to show visiting family. That goes further than it sounds when you are deciding whether a place will feel livable year after year. The honest critique of Maryborough is employment. The regional economy runs on healthcare, retail, agriculture, and government services. If your work requires proximity to a major corporate environment, you will be driving to Hervey Bay or relying on remote arrangements from day one. But if the work problem is already solved, Maryborough offers something becoming structurally unavailable across Eastern Australia. A freestanding house on a real block in a functioning town for under $200,000. Number 2. Charters Towers, Queensland. 136 kilometres inland from Townsville, Charters Towers is one of the most architecturally remarkable towns in Queensland. During the gold rush of the 1870s and 1880s, this was the second largest settlement in the colony. Banks, stock exchanges, grand civic buildings, and churches went up in a fever of optimism fueled by extracted wealth from the reefs below. Then the gold ran out. Today, the population sits around 8,000 people, and those Victorian-era buildings are still standing on Mosman Street. The Stock Exchange Arcade has been preserved. The Venus Battery Stamper site still processes ore for educational tourism. The past here is front and centre on every corner of the main street. Median house prices in Charters Towers sit between $90,000 and $130,000. That is not a formatting error. For that price, you are almost certainly buying a Queenslander-style home with high ceilings, timber floors, and a wide veranda designed to catch the afternoon breeze. Many sit on generous quarter-acre blocks with established mango, lychee, and citrus trees already producing in the yard. The local economy runs on cattle, tourism, and the boarding schools that collectively employ a significant portion of the local workforce. The Charters Towers district produces more beef cattle than most countries you could name, and the infrastructure supporting that industry sustains demand for tradespeople, transport contractors, and agricultural workers. The honest and unavoidable critique is the heat. In the wet season, from November through March, temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, and the humidity pushed inland from the coast makes those months genuinely punishing for people raised in southern states. Nobody should relocate here without spending a January in town first. But from May through September, Charters Towers operates under deep blue skies and warm, dry days that feel like the version of Queensland the tourism campaigns have been promising all along. Number 3. Broken Hill, New South Wales. Broken Hill sits 3 hours east of Adelaide and 12 hours west of Sydney, on the far western edge of New South Wales, where the red earth begins in earnest. The entire city has been listed on the New South Wales Heritage Register. It was the birthplace of BHP, the company that became one of the largest mining corporations on the planet. The union movement that shaped Australian industrial relations for most of the 20th century was built in the silver, lead, and zinc mines under this ground. Median house prices in Broken Hill sit around $110,000. For that, you can purchase a 3-bedroom home on a residential street with a garage, an established garden, and usually a substantial shed out the back. What makes Broken Hill different from most cheap regional towns is its cultural infrastructure. The Artist Heritage Trail connects 19 galleries and working studios across the city. The Pro Hart Gallery, the Brushman of the Bush, the Palace Hotel with its mural-covered walls running across the entire interior. This is not a town coasting on borrowed time. The Flying Doctor Service has its base of operations in Broken Hill. The School of the Air, which pioneered remote education across the Australian outback for decades before the internet made the concept mainstream, began here. That history creates a particular civic pride that shows in the maintained streetscapes and functioning public institutions. The honest critique of Broken Hill is distance. It is far from everywhere that matters logistically. The nearest large city is Adelaide, and the drive crosses serious desert country. Specialist healthcare requires travel. If you have children with complex needs, or if your work depends on physical proximity to a metro hub, the geography simply does not resolve in your favour. But for the writer, the painter, the remote worker, the retired couple with 2 dogs and no mortgage, and the person who has realised that the city is not delivering what they thought it would, Broken Hill is one of the most compelling propositions currently available on the Australian property market. Number 4. Cobar, New South Wales. 5 hours northwest of Sydney on the Mitchell Highway, Cobar sits in the central west of New South Wales on the edge of proper outback country. The town exists because of copper. The Great Cobar Copper Mine is still operational and gives the town an economic pulse that many regional centres of similar size have entirely lost. Median house prices in Cobar hover around $130,000. The town has one of the most distinctive heritage streetscapes in inland New South Wales. The centrepiece is the Great Western Hotel, a 2-storey pub with a continuous iron lace veranda running the full length of the upper facade. The main street was laid out wide enough to turn a full bullock team, and the buildings that line it have been standing since the 19th century. For families, Cobar has a central school running kindergarten through year 12, a district hospital, a Woolworths, and the community services that support a population of around 5,000 people. The town is self-contained in the way that outback towns learn to become across generations of relative isolation. The critique that must be stated plainly is economic concentration. Cobar's fortunes are directly tied to the copper mine and to commodity prices over which the town has no influence. When copper trades low, every retail premises on the main street feels it. The history of Australian mining towns contains enough cautionary chapters to fill a library. Anyone considering a permanent move to Cobar should arrive clear-eyed about that dependency. Number 5. Moree, New South Wales. In the deep black soil country of northern New South Wales, 5 hours northwest of Sydney and an hour south of the Queensland border, Moree has something that almost no other genuinely affordable town in Australia can offer. Natural artesian hot springs right in the middle of town. The Moree artesian pools have been drawing visitors since the 19th century. Geothermal water rises from thousands of meters below the surface at temperatures between 40 and 45 degrees Celsius and feeds a complex of outdoor and indoor pools that remain one of the most underrated wellness destinations in the country. People drive from Sydney for a weekend at those pools. Living above them permanently is a possibility that most city residents have never seriously considered. Median house prices in Moree sit around $140,000. The town of around 10,000 people sits in the middle of one of the most productive agricultural zones in New South Wales. Cotton, wheat, chickpeas, and cattle come out of the Whyalla Valley in volumes that sustain a substantial services industry. This creates genuine employment options for welders, diesel mechanics, agronomists, accountants, and logistics workers in a way that many regional towns cannot match. The honest conversation about Moree involves its social complexity. The town has a significant First Nations population and a history of racial tension that has not been fully resolved. A newcomer arriving without awareness of that history or without genuine respect for the community dynamics at play will find the social landscape considerably more complicated than any property listing will suggest. Moree rewards curiosity and tends to penalise those who arrive with assumptions already formed. Number 6. Whyalla, South Australia. On the Upper Spencer Gulf in South Australia, Whyalla is the state's third largest city and one of the most dramatically undervalued places on the Australian property map. The city of around 22,000 people has a deep water port, a steelworks operating since the 1960s, and a maritime museum that contains a decommissioned World War II corvette hauled 8 kilometres inland from the Gulf and placed in a permanent dry berth outside the museum building. Median house prices in Whyalla have been sitting between $90,000 and $120,000 for the better part of a decade. The Spencer Gulf provides exceptional fishing. King George whiting, snapper, and garfish in quantities that would embarrass most of the East Coast. The calm waters make Whyalla a genuinely pleasant spot to own a small boat or walk the foreshore at sunset. Each winter, thousands of giant Australian cuttlefish migrate to the reefs around Point Lowly to breed. Scuba divers fly from Europe and North America to see it. Locals snorkel over it on weekends. The steelworks has had a complicated recent history involving ownership disputes and government intervention, and the uncertainty around its long-term future has suppressed property values for years. This is the real risk of Whyalla, and it should not be minimised. But for those who see the current uncertainty as a temporary condition rather than a permanent one, Whyalla represents a point of entry that the market may not offer for much longer. Number 7. Port Augusta, South Australia. At the top of the Spencer Gulf, where the Stuart Highway begins its long run north toward Alice Springs, Port Augusta is positioned at the literal crossroads of Australia. Roads extend from here to Adelaide in the south, to New South Wales in the east, to Western Australia in the west, and to the Northern Territory in the north. The Indian Pacific train passes through on its transcontinental journey. Median house prices in Port Augusta sit around $130,000. The city of around 14,000 people has full regional infrastructure, including a hospital, major supermarkets, a TAFE campus, and sporting facilities that support an active community life. The population is diverse, with significant First Nations representation, and the culture of the town reflects its position as a gateway and service centre for an enormous swathe of interior Australia. The Flinders Ranges begin their dramatic rise just east of Port Augusta, and access to Wilpena Pound, Arkaroola, and the Akara Flinders Ranges National Park is unmatched from any other base in South Australia. The ranges at sunrise from Rawnsley Park are quietly spectacular from a house that cost $130,000. The critique of Port Augusta concerns its economic trajectory. The closure of the Northern Power Station in 2016 removed the largest single employer the city had known, and the recovery from that loss is ongoing. It is a town working to rebuild its economic base, and that process is not yet complete. Number 8. Queenstown, Tasmania. Queenstown is unlike any other town in Australia. 45 minutes west of Strahan on the west coast of Tasmania, the hills surrounding the town are bare, not cleared for agriculture, not recently burned, bare in a way that has persisted for over a century, the result of copper smelting emissions that strip the vegetation combined with heavy rainfall and steep terrain that prevented regrowth for decades after the smelting stopped. The result is a landscape of rolling hills in colours that shift from deep olive green to rust red to streaked purple and ochre, depending on the mineral content of the exposed rock face. In certain late afternoon light, the hills above Queenstown look like something from a geological illustration rather than a place where people actually live their lives. Median house prices in Queenstown sit between $60,000 and $90,000, making it one of the cheapest towns in the country. The Mount Lyell copper mine, one of the most historically significant mines in the Southern Hemisphere, still operates. The West Coast Wilderness Railway winds through some of the most remote, intact rainforest in Australia and connects the town to Strahan, providing a tourist experience that draws visitors year-round. The critique of Queenstown is its isolation. The drive to Hobart involves mountain passes and weather conditions that can close roads in winter without significant warning. Employment beyond mining and tourism is limited. But for those who want extreme affordability combined with a landscape that exists nowhere else in Australia, Queenstown is worth the drive out to see before dismissing. Number 9. Zeehan, Tasmania. 40 minutes north of Queenstown and deeper into the same west coast wilderness, Zeehan was once known as the Silver City. In the 1890s, it was the third largest settlement in Tasmania, with a population exceeding 10,000 people. The Grand Hotel had a theatre stage that hosted opera companies and theatrical productions touring from Melbourne and Sydney. The silver ran out. The population did not so much decline as evaporate. Today, Zeehan has around 700 permanent residents. Median house prices in Zeehan sit below $50,000 in most parts of town. The West Coast Heritage Centre contains one of the finest mineral and geological collections in the Southern Hemisphere. The surrounding landscape of Buttongrass Plains, ancient King Billy Pines, and the Pieman River system represents one of the last genuinely undisturbed wilderness areas remaining in Australia. The infrastructure situation must be addressed without softening. There is a small general store, a pub, and limited services. For serious grocery shopping, healthcare, or secondary schooling, residents travel to Queenstown or make the longer run to Burnie on the north coast. Zeehan is not a town for people who want the world within arm's reach. It is a town for people who specifically want the world kept at a considered distance. Number 10. Nhill, Victoria. In the flat, Golden Wimmera region of Western Victoria, 360 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, Nhill is a small agricultural town of around 2,000 people that became unexpectedly well known in 2010 when the local shire partnered with a settlement agency to bring Karen refugees from Myanmar to fill vacancies in the local poultry processing industry. The result was documented in a Deloitte Access Economics report that calculated the resettlement had delivered a net economic benefit of over $40 million to the region in 5 years. Nhill became a case study in how regional Australian towns can be revitalised through managed migration when the existing community approaches the process with genuine openness. Median house prices in Nhill sit around $100,000. The Wimmera landscape is broad and flat and golden in summer. It can feel isolating during long stretches between harvest seasons if you are accustomed to the sensory density of a city. But the community infrastructure is well maintained. The lake at the edge of town provides recreation and bird watching, and Nhill has held onto services that many communities of similar size have quietly surrendered over the past 2 decades. The honest conversation about Nhill is distance. Horsham is the nearest regional centre, roughly an hour east. Adelaide is 3 hours. Melbourne is 4. For families with children, this is not an abstract consideration. It is a daily reality that needs to be planned around rather than waved away. Number 11. Colac, Victoria. 150 kilometres southwest of Melbourne, Colac sits on the edge of Lake Colac, with the Otway Ranges beginning their rise just south of town. In almost any comparable country, a community with significant lake frontage, immediate access to mountain rainforest, and a 2-hour commute to a city of 5 million people would carry a price tag that reflects those advantages clearly. Median house prices in Colac sit around $280,000, higher than every other entry on this list, but positioned against Melbourne and Geelong, it represents a gap in the market that has widened considerably over the past 5 years. The town has a full regional hospital, secondary schooling through Year 12, established retail, and the community institutions that sustain 12,000 people across generations. The Otway Fly Treetop Walk and the Great Ocean Road are both within easy reach. Forest, the mountain biking destination that draws riders from across the country, is 40 minutes up into the ranges. For people who want a house with a yard and lake views but cannot fully sever ties with Victoria's major centres, Colac is the closest entry on this list to a practical compromise rather than a radical lifestyle change. The honest critique is commute maths. The V-Line train to Melbourne takes around 2 hours with a change at Geelong. Doing it daily is a significant commitment, but 2 to 3 days a week under a hybrid arrangement is something more people are discovering works. So there they are, 11 towns, 11 different propositions. Not one of them appearing in a real estate advertising campaign. Not one on the short list of anyone running a property investment seminar. What they share is not that they are perfect. None of them are. What they share is that they are real. Real streets, real communities, real houses that cost real money that a real person can actually accumulate in a reasonable working lifetime without requiring generational wealth or a guarantor with a 7-figure equity position. Australia has spent the better part of a generation convincing itself that property is only worth holding in certain postcodes, and that the rest of the continent is a consolation prize for people who could not make the city work. The evidence on this list suggests that framing has cost a significant number of people a great deal of money and peace of mind they are not getting back. The question worth sitting with after watching this is not simply which of these towns you would move to. The more useful question is why exactly the towns that most Australians can actually afford are the ones most Australians have never seriously considered.